Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and probably good evening to some of you. It's nice to see you all after a few weeks of chatting on Slack or smaller groups. I'm just going to have to keep an eye out for the people joining through the waiting room. So my name is Enrique Mendizabal. I think we've all met some of you, or met some of you at least. And I'm going to be facilitating this first Fishbowl session of the Scaling Exchange. We'll start in just a second. I'm just going to give you a little bit of the kind of rules of the game for today. We're testing this approach, so let's see if it works and how well it works. So right now, all of you have your videos on. I think there's 3 participants who do not have their videos on. But in a second or in a bit, I'm going to ask you to turn off your videos unless you are Haley or the 4 discussants. So we're going to only see the people participating in the first bit of this fishbowl. The first part of the fishbowl is going to be Haley presenting briefly on the first principle of justification, and then Teresa, Tatiana, Amede, and Blanca will provide a discussion, an initial discussion. After they've provided that initial discussion, then we will open it up to everybody else, and then I will ask you to turn on your videos, and so we will see everybody again. And at that stage, you are welcome to join in. Just raise your hand. If you can just raise your hand virtually, and then Louise and I will let you in, so you can speak up and just ask a question or raise a comment, answer any of the questions that we post. That we've posted. So at the end of that round of discussions with everybody, I'm going to bring back the discussants. Again, I'll ask you to turn off your videos, and we'll hear from the discussants what they, a reflection on the conversation they've heard. So they might change their mind. They might want to add something to what they said at the beginning. They might want to reflect on an idea that was presented and discussed throughout the fishbowl. And that's how the session should work. You can join in different ways. So if you want to join in by talking, then please do. We will encourage that. But if you prefer to join in by writing, use the chat option. Just share your comments, your questions. If you want to start by chatting and then join in with video and audio, again, that's fine. Please do. And anyway, I hope this conversation will continue as we go into the rest of the week on Slack. So I've kept letting people in, so I'm just going to repeat. We're going to start in a second with Haley presenting and the discussant. So I'm going to ask everybody to turn off their videos unless you are Haley or a discussant, and that way we're only going to see the kind of the main speakers at the beginning of the presentation. And the other thing I'm going to ask you is to change your name tags. If you can just change them so it says your name and your affiliation, that's going to help us identify each other as well throughout the session. So some of you already done that. Okay, so why don't we start? I'm gonna ask everybody to turn off their video unless you are. Teresa, don't go away. I think you turned off your video again. Great, you're back. Simon, you can turn off your video, and then we'll be back in a second. Great. All right, so that's good. Why don't we start? By the way, we're recording this so that you know. and we'll be sharing the recording with you later on. Just want to make sure I've said everything I had to say in my notes. So no, let's start. Why don't we get started? Haley, just introduce yourself and then let us know what you think about, or IDRC has to say about the first principle, justification.
Great, thank you very much. Give me a minute because I do have just a few slides to share that I'm trying to find here. Here we go. Can everybody see the slides now? Yes? Okay. Great. So thanks very much, Kike. I'm Haley Price Kelly. I work with IDRC's Policy and Evaluation Division since about 2017. And I've been involved with the work here on scaling science, particularly with the scaling playbook that some of you may have taken a look at already as you familiarize yourself with the background materials for the scaling exchange. So do you see full screen or do you see like a strange version with notes? Full screen? Okay. All right. So I'm just going to take a few minutes, as Kike said, to introduce the justification principle. And given that this is our first plenary session and dive into the scaling work as a group, I do just want to start by situating the justification principle within this broader principles-based understanding of scaling. So this emerged through a review of scaling experiences of Southern innovators that IDRC began in 2016 by colleagues Rob McLean and John Gargani, who I think are on the line today, and resulted in the recent work on scaling impact. So based on a review of about 150 projects and a set of in-depth studies across the range of disciplines that IDRC supports, we learned that there's no blueprint for scaling in R4D. It can take place through a range of pathways, including policy change, behavioral change, technologies, methodologies. But what we did identify is a set of common principles that guided scaling efforts across the range of projects. So these form our overall definition of scaling as a coordinated effort to achieve a collection of impacts at optimal scale that's only undertaken if it's morally justified and warranted by the dynamic evaluation of evidence. So a bit of a mouthful, and we're going to break it down, as you know, over the coming weeks to talk about each of these principles individually. We see them as a flexible set of considerations that can help to take action on scaling in diverse and dynamic contexts. So today we're going to be focusing in on the principle of justification. And we're really looking to this group of scaling advisors for experience and insight that can inform how, when there's an intention to scale, we can incorporate this into our work and encourage it through the support we provide for research as well. And of course, as we go through, there might be things that you find are missing from this understanding of scaling or additional to it based on your own experience. We really look forward to hearing more about that. So you've probably already watched the short video that we sent around as preparation with a short example. So I won't spend too much time on this, but just to introduce the conversation. The principle of justification has three key components. So very basically, it says that the choice to scale is in fact a choice. It's not an imperative. It's not something we should do at all costs or without consideration of the types of impacts that scaling could produce, which could be positive or negative. And it requires as well consideration of the perspectives of those who would feel these impacts. So it really asks us to think about the risk to key stakeholders if expected positive benefits aren't produced or if instead negative impacts were to occur. So it also asks us to include consideration of technical justification, so justification based on evidence that an innovation could feasibly create particular impacts, but also to take a more holistic approach by considering moral justification as well. So thinking about what impact should or shouldn't pursue. And this more or less implies the third key point, which is that the choice to scale needs to be shared between the innovators and those who are impacted by an innovation. So how does this compare with the way we might operate in research for development more broadly? To help illustrate this, we put forward this notion of scaling science to illustrate how we'd understand scaling to complement discovery and applied science in research for development. So we know these aren't perfectly distinct categories, and the relationship between them isn't linear, or they don't fit perfectly into boxes. But we do find it to be a helpful way to illustrate how things might be done differently in a research project where there's an intention to scale. So as you can see in this graphic, which is from the scaling playbook, the justification for scaling tends to be wider than that for other types of research. So in applied science, for example, we might justify research by saying that it offers a solution to a local problem, and we might try to incorporate the perspectives of a set of targeted knowledge users who could apply the solution. Justification in scaling science would try to go a bit further by seeking this broader endorsement in the wider context where research outcomes and impacts unfold. And most importantly, we'd be looking for this endorsement of those who would be impacted for better or for worse by the research. Sorry. So we identified and fleshed out all these 4 principles, including justification, through a retrospective review of IDRC supported projects that were identified as having a focus on scaling and some results of scaling processes available. So our next step has been to take a forward-looking approach at how we could proactively apply these principles or enable their application in research projects. So thinking about how we can proactively incorporate the principle of justification into the research process, there are a number of questions that we've proposed that researchers could ask themselves throughout the research project. So you can see in this overview graphic, which is again from the scaling playbook, that all these 4 principles that I mentioned at the beginning can come into play at different stages of the research process. Justification in particular is very pertinent from the beginning of a research project where there's an intention to scale, and framing the research where we set the focus, identify questions and parameters of the research. So how we frame the research, we would understand to affect how its impact is going to be scaled. And we need to think about, for example, who and what are the people, places, and things that could be affected by scaling, what users and beneficiaries we might need to consult to justify the research framing and its potential impact. And throughout the research, we'd also want to consider how to involve this broader range of stakeholders in things like data collection, analysis, interpretation, and how sharing the research could facilitate participation and contribute to its potential impacts. So there may be other considerations that you would raise in incorporating this principle of justification into your research. I think we understand this as an evolving approach to incorporating scaling into research for development. And we'd really look forward to hearing some of this broader groups thinking about how they've practically incorporated this. And I think this leads nicely into turning to our scaling advisors and our other discussants on the line to hear how concretely you might have addressed this principle of justification in your experience. How have you justified any scaling efforts? How have you engaged stakeholders to fulfill this principle? And from my perspective, given IDRC's study has focused on case studies where there was intention to scale and results of scaling to look at, I'd be quite interested in this question as well about instances where maybe you found that there wasn't actually a justification. So with that, I think I'll pass it back to you, Kike, and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Thank you, Haley. Thank you very much. So why don't can you share your screen so that. Haley, are you there? Okay. Did we lose you, Haley? Or did you just turn off your screen?
Sorry, I just muted.
Okay. So thank you very much. Why don't we go now to our discussants, and we'll start with Teresa. So I'm going to ask our discussants to introduce themselves very briefly, and then jump in with their comments or the reflection on those questions based on the conversations in their groups or if they didn't have a chance to discuss at length in the group based on their own experiences. And we'll try to make this into a conversation as much as possible. So we'll start with Teresa, and then just to let everybody else know, on my list I've got Tatiana next, Amede, and then Blanca. So you can prepare yourselves in that order. So Teresa, you wanna join us?
Yeah. Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I am my institution is Universidad Nacional de Colombia. I am working with the Group 1. Well, I want to refer to the first question, how have you justify scaling in your projects? And for this, I took the comments from, especially from Morocco country, and also from my country, from Colombia, enjoying the experience from us. In case in Colombia, we design and implement scaling up projects, and we to link agriculture with nutrition to improve the and nutrition. For doing this, we promote the consumption of a food ancestrally rooted in the culture of Colombia. In other words, is potato. But this potato were nutritionally improved. The main lines that we work was promoting gender equity, good dietary habits, the consumption of more nutritious potato, that was the innovation, and empowering the local leadership to strengthen the governance. The innovation was 3 potato varieties with better iron and zinc contents, called the more nutritious potato. And we scaled this innovation and to reach more than 6 million consumers. In total was around 14 million in the time of the project. And why we did this innovation, why we work in this? Because our project was implemented in one area in Colombia that is characterized because suffer the food insecurity, undernutrition. The average is around 42% of and we wanted to impact and to alleviate the conditions about poverty and also the food insecurity. In this population, there is a high prevalence of childhood iron deficiency, anemia. It is estimated that 1 in every 2 children under 2 years old has anemia and iron deficiency, and also in pregnant women is 40%. Therefore, the research hypothesis was to improve the contents of iron in potato because this food is highly consumed, and for this way to improve the nutritional status of the population. In case of Morocco, in Morocco, in developing countries like Morocco or even Colombia, the case of underground resources exploitation has resulted in enormous piles of mineral byproducts, mine wastes, sludge, ashes, etc., abandoned in the open air environment after the mining site was closed without rehabilitation or remediation. So, from 2009 to 2017, thanks to the support of the IDRC, the research team that Professor Rachi led had supervised and developed through studies at the laboratory scale and in the field cost-effective restoration methods adapted to the semi-arid climate to valorize and stabilize harmful mine wasted in Morocco. The objective of this project was provide various solutions adapted to social, economic, and environmental properties of numerous poor, polluted, and isolated areas in Morocco, as well in other countries. For them, the most important and significant innovation of the Morocco's concern was the valorization of the main wasted from close coal Gerade, maybe is the pronunciation, mine in Eastern or Morocco. The main objective of the research was to recreate hope and richness in polluted, poor and isolated areas through reuse and recycling of mineral byproducts. Since its coal mine was closed, Gerais city has become a virtual host town. The team had optimized the manufacturing process for low-cost construction material like bricks, concrete, artificial stones, etc. At the semi-pilot scale, I complete a commercialization study. The obtaining products meet international standards in terms of mechanical and durability properties and environmental performance. One important theme for case in Colombia, the overall rationality of the scaling up plans was based on employee education as a sustainable chain principle. For us, the education is a key element to transform lines, to improve, oriented to build the autonomy of farmers. Yeah, with education, we try to generate, to create autonomy for people in highly participatory process and strengthening collective action through one school that we create, design, and implement that we call it family farming communitarian schools. And the approach was a process of learning by doing. These schools were a key mechanism for scaling up and provide sustainability for production of improved potato varieties, and this led to benefits for farmers and consumers. This was combined with the methodology, with other social methodologies, because we implement social and technological innovations and scaling those innovations. That other innovation was the rural entrepreneur nucleate, that they generate business with these potatoes, and with these methodologies was possible to scale and to reach those very big amount of consumers in Colombia for the more nutritious potatoes.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa.
Okay.
So you've presented the justification for scale, and also in the case of Colombia, the means for scaling through education. Is that correct? The justification in the case of Colombia would have been there was a need to address a challenge of malnutrition, quite high levels of malnutrition in some regions, and therefore there was a need to be able to scale the innovation, and to do that, you used education to train and give it sustainability as well. And I put a question on the chat if people want to address that. Can we move on to Tatiana? So, and I'll try to keep you guys within 5 minutes more or less, so that we can have everybody join in later. If there are more issues, we'll raise them. We'll bring them up in a second. So Tatiana, do you want to follow up?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Tatiana Rincon. I am Vice President of Social Protection and Livelihoods at Fundación Capital. I work with also Yvonne Vidal from the Institute of Peruvian Studies, as well as Ursula Harman from the Catholic University of Peru, as well as Ana Paula Borboleto, who is a researcher in Brazil. So in terms of the first question, we have an example of some initiatives, and in all the cases, there has been a lot of technical evidence and research that supported the scaling up. So one of the programs, which is the program that I am in charge of, are the graduation programs, which are basically social and productive inclusion for the poorest. Just a matter of example, there was a very important body of evidence that was produced globally. Even the results from 8 randomized control trials were presented and shared in Science, and that led to the adoption of these types of programs globally. then we started working with the IDRC and the Ford Foundation in order to combine or to include this approach into social protection programs in 5 countries in Latin America. And with the IDRC, we started working on the evaluation of those pilots. Therefore, we had not only like a global body of evidence, but specific evidence that favor the adoption, because we have like country-based evidence. And that's it. For financial inclusion programs, that was a joint program between the Institute of Peruvian Studies and Fundación Capital. Again, there was a very important body of evidence around the world. And the Institute of Peruvian Studies, they were in charge of, in that program, we were integrated financial inclusion into cash transfer programs. And while the work was being done, the Institute of Peruvian Studies, they conducted evaluations all the time. Therefore, like evidence was being produced on a permanent basis, and that favored the scaling up. And I would say that in both cases, the moral issues, at least at that stage of the pilot phase, were not like a big concern. The moral impact, especially, that can be seen more when scaling up, and I will refer to that in a few minutes. And also, a third initiative is an initiative that is led by the Catholic University of Peru. The university developed a system for heating households in the high Andes areas. That technological innovation consisted in carving holes in a wall. They identify like the wall that received most of the sun during the day. And by doing this technology, they were able to heat the interior of the house, and they were able to identify that the heat increased between 7 to 10 degrees. So it was very important because it was a very sustainable and a very low cost way of improving the life of the people. And it is very important because usually, like, people in those areas, they have a lot of like long related diseases and respiratory diseases. So we were doing something, we were not only improving people's households, but also improving the health of the people, and there was evidence. So I would say that in the 3 cases, the technical justification was there, but then coming to the moral aspect of the scaling, and we devoted a lot of time talking about that. In the case of financial inclusion, when there is a scaling up, new actors integrate into the ecosystem. So, for example, you have banks, you have microcredit institutions, and you also have a commercial. You have, for example, big institutions like Falabella, well, or commercial chains, and they want to put their credit products into the people. So if they are not sufficiently educated on their personal finances, you can create, I mean, you integrate people into the financial system, but if they are not well trained, and if they are not necessarily if they don't know very well about their personal finances, they can be indebted in an easy way because they don't understand the credit interest rates, and they see like an easy and fast solution, especially because in that case, credit is more linked to consumption rather to investment. So this is something that we have to take into account, because it's not only about providing access to the people to savings accounts, but when a project is being scaled, we have to take it into account that there are other actors with other interests that can be integrated into the scene. And also, in the case of Peru, we were discussing that the technology that the Catholic University designed was very, I mean, the outcomes and the benefits were so evident that there was interest from the government about scaling this project and to be able to encourage more houses to use this technology. But when this happened, they forgot a very important element, and is the ownership of the technology by the participants. Because for Ursula, who is the person that leads this project from the Catholic University, she shared with us that it's not only a matter of constructing and building the holes in the wall, but it's a matter of empowerment. It's a matter of creating a lot of it's a matter of creating an awareness. It's a matter of creating ownership of the technology. And the ministry that was able to scale that project, the vision they had of the program was that it was only an infrastructure program. And when that happens, when you have this type of vision, you have a very difficult environment because people are not going to use the technology. So it's things that I think that you have seen all around the world when you go to a house and they have a very nice kitchen, but no one uses the kitchen, or you go and you see a bathroom and no one uses the bathroom because people don't feel close to the technology that the government implemented. So it's something that you have to take into account, especially when scaling up.
So you're bringing us to the who is involved, right? Who is involved in this, deciding that this is worth scaling? And you have to involve the people themselves, right? The intended beneficiaries themselves about what's good for them. And interesting that you've added in the justification discussion the potential, right? The potential in the future that other actors might get involved, right? You, as you said, you open up the possibility of people having savings accounts and accessing financial services that are going to be great for their livelihood. But you also opening up for them to be sold, very high interest credit cards, and be targeted by different institutions that might be sort of counterproductive to the original objectives, right? So taking that into account is certainly important. Thank you, Tatiana. Can I move on to Amede? Would you mind maybe addressing the first question as well, or any others if you think it's already been said? And again, I'm going to try to keep us within five minutes.
Thank you, Enrique. I will try. So good day, everyone. My name is Amede Gogova. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at Laval University in Quebec, the province of Quebec in Canada. First, I have to mention that not all the members of our group were available during the preparation week. So I hope those who are attending, they might jump into the discussion later to share direct experiences or example with the group. So in our group, we started with reflection on the two key elements of the justification, that is the technical evidence and the values. So for technical evidence, depending on the field, for example, in our field, health, and we look at the efficacy, effectiveness of innovation. But in the group also, people working in agriculture and etc., they mention the market-ready solution as a justification, a technical justification. The fact that a vaccine, for example, is put on the market, that is evidence that can justify scaling up that innovation. The second aspect, the value, in general, that means things people care most about. If we define value that way, then we can say value not universal. So how they are defined, whose value may prevail in deciding to scale up. So this is bring us to the consideration hierarchy of evidence, how to the ranking importance of value. So those are things that we did not address, but we want to put forward to the whole group going forward. So from then, I'll go quickly to the 4 questions. The first one, of course, with example from our members working mainly in Africa, South Africa. So I joined the other people mentioning generating income as a justification. So this, I think that was already mentioned, to facilitate greater uptake or adoption of technological innovation. For example, livestock vaccine, knowing that people that are impacted, they know that the deadly disease are killing their flock, etc. Right? So this is a direct evidence of what the vaccine or the new technology can do for them, prevent their animals or health for dying. So this is an example of justification to scale up. If I go to the second question, if you have encountered some circumstances, then members of our group mentioned, for example, high cost, and that is particularly in an example of scaling up innovation in French-speaking country in Africa. So they're started in English-speaking country, but they have, because of high cost, issue with translation of materials, lack of resources to provide output during the meeting, etc. These are circumstances that can prevent them from scaling up beyond the English-speaking country. If, for example, also the scaling intervention add more complexity or issue of sustainability, that the scaling of the new innovation cannot be sustained, then this is something that can prevent from going forward to scale. Also, they mentioned, for example, if the scaling had the potential of sacrificing core values. So this brings back to how we define core values, whose value may prevail to move forward or not, okay? The third question, we do have I would say the shortest answers, because all the members who were present during the discussion mentioned the impacted are those who should decide whether the moral or technical justification before moving forward. So the impacted are those who actually benefit from the scaling. And also, at least one member added also the investors into developing the technology. So the first group that we mentioned is the impacted, but also we mentioned the investors in developing the new technology. Finally, the last question about how to involve different stakeholders in the scaling process, etc. Also, this depends on the field. For example, in our field, there are different approaches that we call participative research or integrated knowledge translation or patient-oriented research. In all those approaches, you need to ensure that the key stakeholders should be part of the implementation team or research team from the start. And in a nutshell, how to do that, you need to conduct a stakeholder analysis. And so to conduct a stakeholder analysis, we can borrow tools from project management, implementation science, so we do not provide a list of tools that can be used, but the important concept to retain here is to conduct a stakeholder analysis. You can use multi-stakeholder engagement platform to consult the different stakeholders on the decision to scale up. So I would say that's all for now for our group. We try to answer the different questions briefly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amede. That was great. I sort of highlight that I get from this is also you started with this, and then I think you almost ended with this demand from, I take this, a demand from the intended beneficiary, right? So the justification might come from those potentially being benefited, demanding this technology, demanding this innovation, actively demanding it, right? But not necessarily passively demanding it, as in, you know, the evidence says you might be benefited, as Tatiana was saying. It's not just the technology being presented to them; they have to want to. They need to use it, and they need to want to use it as well. Blanca, do you want to finish this round for us, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Enrique. Hi, everyone. My name is Blanca Llorente. I am the research director at Fundación ANASH. We are a Colombian-based NGO, and we work mostly with tobacco control, although we also participate in other aspects of public health policy and development policy in our country and in the region. There's so many things to say, and I'll try to keep this more or less organized, but I have, frankly, a lot of random ideas, so I'll just put them there to continue the conversation. Very interesting to hear from the other colleagues. I am part of group 3. We didn't have the chance to really have a conversation, but a colleague from the group, Ali, I'm sorry if I don't pronounce the name correctly, I think is his name. He shared a very interesting experience, and this made me think about a lot about the 2 elements of the justification question that you're proposing to us today. And one of these elements was the evidence. You know, we need to have the evidence to back up a proposal to scale or to decide not to scale up an intervention. And when I was reading Ali's work, very interesting, and I think he shared that in the general chat. One of the challenges that we have, he did a review of evidence on practices at the primary level, the primary care level, to find evidence on the convenience or not of scaling up certain interventions. And I'm sorry, Ali, if you're hearing me and I'm not doing a good job of summarizing your work, but what I found interesting among many things was that one of the conclusions was that not many of these works were focusing on finding what works in terms of scaling and what are the strategies that work in terms of scaling. And this reminded me of a report I was trying to write two years ago. I was commissioned to write something about, in terms of recommendations for best practices for the Inter-American Development Bank to promote policies for people with disabilities, persons with disabilities. And our colleagues involved in this work, we were faced with a big challenge, because we found a lot of case studies that described accurately the interventions in different countries, but we didn't find any elements, or almost none, in the discussion to suggest the suitability of scaling those experiences, moving them forward to a population level or to, a wider level. So that was, we were faced with a lot of literature, but with very little evidence to make our case and to make recommendations. That was a huge challenge. So when I was reading this other work by Ali and colleagues, that was what, you know, spoke to me loudly. We need to discuss more explicitly in our interventions and in our work, and to address that in a more systematic way, probably, in order to make better recommendations, in order to inform better our discussions with policymakers, in order to conduct our discussions about policy recommendations in an ethical way, because we know better if these things are going to work when we recommend them in a different context or in a larger scale. So those are my thoughts regarding evidence. I think we need to, I mean, we talk a lot about evidence-based policy, but I wonder if we're doing enough in terms of these questions of scaling. And part of it, I agree with one of the conclusions of these colleagues, is we need to find a certain, you know, minimum common background on how to measure what are the indicators of a successful or having a potential successful intervention that is, you know, amenable to move forward, to scale up. So I'll leave it there. Regarding the issue of values, I work most of the time I work in tobacco control, and most of the time within tobacco control I work promoting tobacco taxation. And it seems, as opposed to Teresa's description of her experience with potatoes, which seems very organic, right? Potatoes is part of our culture. It's something that is readily acceptable. It's already in the diet of the people. They know how to grow it, how to cook it. The taste is, you don't have to really promote it because it's already there, right? I have the opposite circumstance. Taxes are something very abstract for most of the population as a health intervention. Most of the people don't understand them as a health intervention. Taxes are a reality, a sad reality of life most of the time. But to see them as tools to nudge people to change their behaviors or to prevent them to engage in behaviors that are going to harm their health, and to prevent the health systems from systemic risks, is something that is not right at the top of mind of policymakers and the population in general. So usually we don't have, when we are promoting these ideas among policymakers, we don't have a wide base of the population cheering for us to adopt higher tobacco taxes, for instance. So it seems like mostly a top-down approach. And on top of everything, we have a stakeholder who is actively posing arguments against scaling and against the extrapolation of successful experiences in other countries, which is the tobacco industry. So this brings me to one of the comments of Amede about, it's not just about stakeholder mapping when you're addressing values and understanding the values and the value system to, you know, to get a better idea of the feasibility of scaling up. But also we need to come up within this stakeholder analysis and strategies. With this, I think this is also relevant for alcohol and some of the obesity discussions as well, which is coming up with best practices about conflict of interest management, how to manage conflict of interest within this stakeholder mapping. Because sometimes we assume, and I find this very, very common with, I am not a researcher, I am an advocate with some research training. But when I discuss with these researchers, with all due respect, they tend to think that that most of the stakeholders will, obviously they would have their own interests in mind, but there's an assumption of lack of conflict of interest behind. Not explicit. It's not explicitly put forward in most of the conversations I have with researchers. And we need to address that in a more systematic way, I would say. Well, those are my thoughts so far. I don't know if this is too short or too long. But
no, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much, Blanca. It makes me think of, I think we've been talking about justifying something, right? Justifying the intervention. But from what you're saying, at least I'm trying to put it into words, but it's about, it's asking who are we justifying it to? So it's asking ourselves, who are we trying to justify this intervention to? Is it to farmers? Is it to policymakers? Is it to the scientific community? Is it to the funder? Is it to the general public? Is it to someone who is going to be, as John is saying, is going to be affected, potentially harmed by this intervention? Or are those who are going to be potentially benefited by this intervention? So we have to think about the other, the audiences, the publics that we're justifying these to, and to think about what might be the best ways or the most, the fairer ways, the most justifiable ways of justifying, I guess, what we are saying, right? So it's the right approach. And different things might be important to different people as well. Are there any questions among this group? Are there any comebacks, any questions you have to each other from this conversation? Something you might want to add before I bring everybody else in and ask them to join and share the thoughts, ideas, and maybe follow up.
Yeah, I have a quick
Tatiana,
question
yes.
for Teresa before she goes. And I'm sorry, I don't know anything about the nutrition and potatoes, but I'm just so curious. I don't know if there were any moral considerations between like these modified potatoes versus native potato species, that some people say they could be more nutritious. So I don't know if you had like this moral dilemma when you were working on this project. You are on mute, Teresa.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Do you hear me? Okay, well, we don't have any dilemma about this because we improve the potatoes, but we use a normal process for improve the potatoes. No genetic modification, was nothing about that. And the most important thing was that our university worked with this farmer from long time ago. So they know the work of the university, and was so easy to work with them because previously we worked in participatory research and they select other varieties. The difference with the new varieties was the high quality for nutrition. That was the difference. And then we involved them in the educational program about nutrition and to show how is the important to consume micronutrients and this. And other important thing was the potato is the axis of the economy for those population. And we demonstrate then that if they improve the quality of the crop, they can get more income. And with more income and better quality of the potatoes was really not so easy, but was more easier than tackle the problem, and they consume and they produce and they commercialize those potatoes. But we don't have any restriction because we didn't work with modified organism.
Thank you. Any other one? Should we let people in? There's already a bit of a conversation on chat. So if anybody wants to join in, you can turn on your video and then we'll see everybody joining us. turn on your videos and you'll join in. Great. I can see John there. Louise, Rob. Yes, great. So we'll get you all in. So who would like to go? Who would like to join this conversation? I saw just a comment from Petronella just now from South Africa, talking about sort of cost-benefit analysis on different groups. Do you wanna share with us that comment, Petronella, or do you wanna leave it on the chat? Who else would like to join in? So maybe I don't see any hand. I can see a hand by Ursula. Okay, so, or Petronella, were you getting ready to say something and I interrupted you?
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you. I was actually trying to see what I was responding to, but I'm not very quick on the keyboard. But the point that I was trying to make relates to, you know, the fact that I think it was suggested that if there are people that are likely to lose from scaling up, then the decision to scale up should be reconsidered. And I just brought in an argument from an economics dimension that as long as there is a mechanism for compensating the losers, then it might be worth it, because what you have eventually is an increase in the net wealth of the society. So I don't know of any intervention that would not have losers and winners. So for me, it's important, yes, to consider who loses and who is negatively impacted, but that should not be the only criteria that is used to decide not to scale up or to scale up. Thanks.
Great. Does anybody have a response to that before I move on to the next person with a hand up? Yeah, so I'll go to Ursula. I mean, just a quick comment. I thought, Petronella, when I was going to respond to your comment, thinking, oh, this is very, I'm an economist as well, so this is very economic thinking. But as you've explained now in audio and video, it isn't that straightforward, right? Because there are other elements to it. There might be other reasons why. I mean, the losers might be the most vulnerable in society, so you don't want to add any cost to them, or there might not be support to that compensation as well. So there might be other reasons why there might not be that support. Ursula, do you wanna join in? I don't see you. I think you'd have to. Can you join in with video so we can see you as well, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay. Oh, I can turn because I'm with a bad connection right now.
Okay, that's all right.
But next time you will see me, I hope. So hi everyone. I was interested about what Blanca said about conflict interests that is not explicit mention in this process of scaling, and I think it's important. And I have a case of the case that I work on technologies, as Tatiana told, commented in her exposition, is technologies to improve houses to reduce respiratory disease and so the thing here in scaling this kind of technologies, as Tatiana was telling us, is that normally we assume that technology is going to be very welcome, and this is a problem that we try to discuss with the people that were working on the project, with the government that will be on charge on this of implementing these houses, and it's about how do you deal with these conflicts, because families is not like normally probably they're going to say yes. Put me anything, any technology you want in my house, but it's not assured that it will be used. That is the main objective of every socio-technical project or intervention, is that people use the technology in order to have an improvement in some way in their life. So if it's assumed that technology is welcome without any conflict, and without any conflict for others stakeholders, is going to be really then a conflict in not really achieving the goals of the project. And this is that I'm working on, how to really understand the complexity of adopting and adapting new technologies, and adapting is not an individual decision, it's a collective decision. So it's about the stakeholders coming in, and when you involve more stakeholders, you involve more conflicts, because everybody has their own interests. So it's very I think appropriate what Blanca said, and also not only interested but also power relations. So something that I was working on with government professionals was how to this using the language that is very important. Instead of using beneficiaries, that is very low power and it's not a word that empower people as participants or co-creators of technology, is a huge difference between those, because normally beneficiaries it carries a lot of perceptions. You don't have an opinion of this, just accept it. But if you're a participant or you are a co-creator, you have a lot of to say, or even to say no, or to say whatever you want to say, but it's going to be voiced, and it's going to be heard, and it's going to be taken into account for the rest of the process, from the beginning to, and even so to scale. That was one of the questions, how to who is going to decide scaling a project. So that's what I'm finished. That's the idea of my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. That's very interesting. Again, I think it moves us from justifying something that is being done on others to maybe having those people who are, going to be subject of that innovation or intervention to argue for something they want, right? To be part of that process themselves, rather than something being justified on their behalf. You're bringing them not just as passive participants and beneficiaries, but active in the design and in the development of the arguments and in the approach to scale. And in that process, of course, there is a power and conflict are going to be present. Vicky, you had your hand up next, and then I'm going to go to Berhan and then Tatiana in that order. Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I can't have video. I can't have video. My internet isn't good enough. So I work in education, and so I've been listening with interest to all of the presentations on the projects in health and agriculture and so on. And I'm wondering, because the way that we look at scaling in education is a bit different. So around, for example, the issue of technical justification. So technical evidence in education may not be as conclusive as perhaps in health or agriculture or finance. And so there is that question of, what kinds of evidence, what kind of evidence is enough to say that one should scale, and what are the standards of proof with respect to essentially a social historical relation, right? A social phenomenon, which is learning. And then in terms of the moral justification, it's interesting is that if you look at public education systems are at scale systems. So there is an overarching moral imperative to scale in public education. That's education for all. So given a proven innovation in one context, for example, in one public school system, let's say to eliminate barriers to girls' participation or to improve literacy learning, the question is not really if it should be scaled, but how specifically where. So when we look at scaling in education, to scale an innovation in education is to contextualize and adapt. It's not essentially to replicate or adopt. Or to use learning terminology, we differentiate, we individualize, we personalize. Because that would be what would be effective learning, effective teaching and learning. So the questions for us when we're looking at how effectively scaling something, questions for researchers and designers is, are there essential components of an innovation? Are there contingent components? If so, how do these essential and contingent components interact? And what are the implications of this interaction on A, the innovation per se, meaning the model that will work in contexts, and B, more broadly on how to scale effectively. So my impression is that sort of the approach is slightly different because the area is different and sort of what we're studying is different. That's just my impression.
Thank you very much. So it brings up the issue of what is how do we assess the sort of certainty of the evidence behind justification to scale in different fields, right? I think this is a conversation we tend to have also in terms of what is is the RCT the gold standard all the time? Can it justify replicating or scaling a project? Berhane, do you want to join in that conversation or related subject? Are you? Oh, yes, I see you there.
Thank you, Henrik. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My inputs are based on a project in Uganda funded by DRC on the use of information technology for improving the adaptive capacity of smallholder farmers to the impacts of climate change. I totally agree that the perceived needs of the beneficiaries, the stakeholders, and especially the government institutions is critical for justifying scale up. The effectiveness of the solution as compared to other alternatives, really being able to show the relative advantage of the solutions that we were promoting was very important. A very clear policy support for the intervention is also critically important. It seems obvious, but there was a different project that I was involved in South Africa, where we were forced to postpone the scale up. There was a perceived need, there was a demand actually for it. It has a relative advantage compared to other alternatives, but there were specific policy aspects that must be in place for it to work, and getting those policy items in place was not easy, so we have to postpone it. And in terms of the moral imperatives, I want to give one example, which was also something which we considered. We conducted a willingness and ability to pay for climate and agricultural information by smallholder farmers, and about 35% were willing, the rest were not. So the questions that came was, do we scale up this solution to those who are able to pay? And is that right? The most vulnerable people will not be able to pay probably. So we changed our scale up approach that it must be the government responsibility, not the end users. This must be provided as a public good, so that every smallholder farmer would be able to get that information and help them to adapt. And finally, in terms of strengthening the role of different stakeholders, really engaging them from the very beginning, from the design of the project. I mean, Scale Up we had in mind from the very beginning, and it was the primary pathway for Scale Up from the very beginning. I mean, we thought it could be a policy approach, but the market approach was also an option. That's why we did the willingness and the ability to pay assessment. But the government leadership, an actual government leadership was important. So there was a steering committee which was chaired by the most substantive government entity, so that the process of institutionalizing the system started right when we are doing the research, and it would be easier when we are going to do the actual Scale Up. So government leadership was important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hani. That was interesting. I mean, I think we talked about different stakeholders. Governments usually are the ones behind trying to bring about these scaling. I'm mindful of time, and this is the first time we come together, so it's nice to get everybody's view in. And then, so in a few minutes, I want to go to the discussants and Haley to reflect back on what has been said and the evolution of the conversation. I want to go to Rob McLean, who's behind, or John as well, who are behind some of these ideas that we're discussing today, and give them a chance to comment on what's been said. I'm going to ask you to be very brief, though, but maybe we can start with Rob and then John, if you want to add something.
Sure. Thanks, Kike, and thanks everyone for the really insightful input thus far. My book is quick. I guess first off, I'm trying to think about all of these things I'm hearing and how, as a funder, we can respond to some of this, because I think there's a lot here that our actions funding research can support. And I seem to hear that this is an important process in a research project. And how can we ensure that the work we're doing is actually supportive of this justification process? Often this is assumed in the approval of a research grant. And perhaps it's a longer drawn out process that has to happen through the process of a research grant rather than just at an approval stage. Great notes here. And just a couple comments about specific things. I mean, I love this concept of the differences from across fields. And I think that's one of the strengths of bringing this group together, is we're going to begin to hear about what those differences are and begin to share those and maybe see that there are some similarities, but also where differences would be valuable across fields. And I think that's a unique feature of this conversation I'm looking forward to hearing about. And then just a specific note I put in the questions too that I'd love to hear more on in the remaining time we have is about how we make explicit this process of prioritizing whose values prevail, as Emma Day put it. How do we ensure that that's not something that's hidden behind the power structures that exist during a research project, as Ursula put it? So I just think there's a lot there we have to learn about that process as a group. Thanks, Kike.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, how to make these things explicit. I'm reminded of John Gaventa's Power Cube, and sort of hidden power and invisible power, and the effort to try to make them visible to all to see and understand. That might be actually an interesting tool to use in thinking about a scaling process. I'll think about that. John, do you want to add something to Rob's comments?
Yeah, I would. First of all, I'd like to echo what he said. I mean, I think the discussion is very interesting, and I too have many notes. I keep looking away to write things down, and I feel like I'm missing something while I do that. I guess another thing I'd like to say is that, I don't think that Rob and I have some sort of answer to what scaling is or what it should be. I mean, our attempt has been to try to reflect a wide range of perspectives on scaling and to keep learning from people who are doing it in real world contexts to develop a better understanding for ourselves and a community. I think one of the challenges in doing this as a group is how comfortable we become from walking away from the usual ways we talk about our work. I mean, a lot of what I've heard has been very interesting, but it also sounds to me a little bit like what you would tell a funder who might want to give you money. You're here to tell us why your programs are awesome and why they're working out and all the benefits they will have. Now, at some level, I mean, you must believe that because you want to do this work, and that's good. I'm glad about that. But I think a lot of what Rob and I's writing is challenging people to do is really to consider, how could this go wrong? Where are the risks? How do we anticipate them and try to avoid them and make something better out of that? And that, I think, requires being a little bit vulnerable in a world where it's hard for us as organizations constantly scrambling for funding to admit that there could be some risk to what we do, that we may not achieve what we're doing, that we don't know whether scaling to this level or that level would be better. Scaling is kind of a journey into the unknown. It's not sort of a fulfillment of a promise that's easily kept. So I would just invite us to maybe try to become more comfortable with each other and be willing to do that. Of course, it's easier for me because I don't really run a program, so I don't feel pressure. So this is where I blame Rob and the whole funding structure that it has, imposed this kind of way of communicating. But I'm sure that's one of the things he'll put on his list to fix. Thanks.
Thank you, John and Rob. Anybody else wants to join into any responses to those reflections from them or others? Otherwise I'll go back to I'll speak slowly so you have a chance to intervene if you want to. Otherwise, I'll go back to Berhan, you raise your hand? You wanna?
Yes, thank you. Just a quick input. I think the major impediment that we faced for scale up was, and still is that when the mandates between different government entities are very murky and unclear, and there is an overlap. As I said, we're dealing with climate and agricultural information. So the climate information, the agricultural part is okay, but the climate information, the Office of the Prime Minister, they have disaster preparation and preparedness bureaus. So they consider that emergency response is their role. The Ministry of Agriculture, they think that it's their role. The Meteorology Department, they think that it's their role. So that mix of mandates, it truly is a huge impediment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Berhan. So let me go back to the Abu Said. You had your hand raised. I'll give you the last word before we go back to the group. Oh, did I miss you? Did I lose you now? There you go. I think you're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi all. I'm Dr. Abu Said, speaking from Dhaka, Bangladesh. So should I react to the discussion here, or I should address the questions?
No, you can comment. Sorry.
Okay. So what I see first from my experience from the career was, I guess, it supported a big program. So I was principal investigator in one of the consortium that is high. I hope we you might be aware of it.
Sorry, I'm having a lot of
From
trouble
there,
hearing you. Am I the only
scaling
one?
issue discussion or can you hear me now?
Yes, keep going. It's my connection. Keep going.
Can you hear me now? From Korea, we had, I was a co-principal investigator in one of the consortium, that is HighWire. In HighWire, we didn't have any scaling up issues discussed in the beginning of the proposal or in the funding time. However, we had option of piloting of some innovation or finding or identifying some innovation which we wanted to replicate in the region of South Asia. In third or fourth year of research, we found that there are some innovations which need to be scaled up. Do you follow my voices? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So when we identified the innovation, by the time the project is almost over, 5 years gone. So I think Rob McLean, you may notice this one while it addresses your questions as well. Yeah. So by the time we identified the innovations to be replicated, to be scaled up or out scaled, the project is almost over. Then we set with IDRC how to support this taking forward. Then the opportunity grants came in. But when we talk about scaling up, that is a huge amount of work. It's not like if you are talking about like what other colleague was talking about, potato or tobacco. These involves a lot of farmers. I'm talking about giving climate and flood resilient housing in Bangladesh, in floodplain, where they experience a lot of riverbank erosion and displacement. There we wanted to give a climate and flood resilient housing or prefabricated housing for the people. And now that needs a lot of effort, a lot of engagement with the stakeholders in horizontal or in vertical system.
So if I get it right, so my connection was a bit patchy, but the main point here is, of course, this is a huge issue of time, right? It takes a long time to identify the innovation. It might be the end of the project by then, and then scaling takes even longer time. And that's a challenge I think we're going to address, like for sure, throughout this this session. The timing probably is not the right timing all the time, right? So why don't we use that as a way of segueing into this last session. I was going to go with Tatiana, but Haley, since you have your hand up, why don't you go first and maybe reflect on what you heard, and then I'm asked Tatiana, Amede, and Blanca. Oh, and Teresa, you're still here to reflect on what you've heard. And I ask you to be very brief, maybe 1 minute each, so we can finish on time. Haley, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Kike. It was just to come, I think, directly on what Abu was saying in relation to, you know, this intention to scale might not be there at the very beginning of a project. It might arise throughout, and how do we kind of deal with that, giving limited resources within projects? And I think that's one of the things that we can think about in relation to this justification principle as well, is how do we help our grantees to kind of build that justification in whenever it comes up in a project, and to kind of make a strong case for carrying this forward, however it may be with IDRC or elsewhere. So I think that is an interesting point that came up. I think Amade raised it as well, saying, you know, maybe there was a moral and technical justification to scale, but it was going to cost a lot to start working in a new linguistic context, etc. So how do we try to make sure that the justification is really clear and kind of balance that with the resource issues? And other than that, just to kind of echo John and Rob's thoughts, thank everyone for all these really valuable contributions. I think the points about kind of whose values count, and I think what Blanca raised about researchers, I think we tend to like to claim we're objective, and I don't know that we can do that if we're really going to take this moral justification to heart. So how do we kind of just as funders and as researchers admit up front what the values are behind some of these decisions?
Thank you, Haley. Tatiana, you want to go next?
Yes. I just wanted to say that scaling is not necessarily the best scenario. This is what I'm taking with me. However, we also have to take into account the cost of inaction. And I am thinking that I'm taking one of the comments that John did during in the chat, and he said, when you scale, you change the context and the set of actors, and that changes the impact risk. However, I believe that research plays a very important and a key role, because we need to see how to anticipate risks, as also as I believe it was John or Rob who mentioned that, because in some cases, like not to do something can be more harmful. For example, not to have access to financial products can be more harmful than to have them. And even the opportunity and the access to financial products was very key or has been instrumental during the pandemic in terms of reaching underserved population who has been benefiting by some support and some subsidies from the government. So we have to include in the evaluation cycle prospective scenarios, and also, as Ursula mentioned, it is very important to work hand to hand with people in a co-creation space. So we have to think about that we have to engage with people, not only the design, in the implementation and the evaluation phase, but even when we are scaling and when we are looking at the potential risk, we have to consider participants' views and certain opinions, and even if they are not the ones who are directly voicing that, we have to take this into account in a very deep and important way in the evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Teresa, I think you raised your hand, so you can you might have to go. So I'll give you the...
Thank you. Thank you. I want to refer your question, Enrique, how to manage time. It can take a long time to identify the innovation. I think that is a crucial point when we are doing research for development, because when you have an innovation, that innovation derives from a scientific process. You need to have very solid scientific results to do this innovation is working or doesn't work. So that takes time. And I think researchers, we need a comprehension and understanding from the funders to understand that situation. I found that IDERC understand very well that point, but other funders, they don't understand. They need to have an innovation from the air and to implement that innovation a bit scale, and that is not possible. So I think this kind of projects, they need long period of time to develop or to finish one innovation and to implement and to scale that innovation. I need, for that is necessary the understanding from the funders and to understand how the science is working. That.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Blanca, you wanna add your reflection?
There are many things, but I just want to go back to John's point about vulnerability. I think that is one of the main obstacles to have meaningful conversations and come up with better institutional arrangements to learn from our own experiences and in a collective way. I don't have answers really exactly for that, but also I share that concern. we are in a system that rewards what is successful, and then we consciously or unconsciously enhance what is good about our experiences in general, in advocacy, in research, and we tend not to share our failures, right? And also, I think in the process, thinking of scaling up as a process, and I'm not aware if there is some methodologies or some already, you know, standards for that, but it would be useful also to have clear practices and clear guidelines on how far should we go in scaling up, and when to pull the lever, you know, when should we have to stop, and how organizations can provide the right context to give the incentives for those involved to pull the lever, you know, to move away from scaling up when this is not working. I mean, those are some of the ideas, many thoughts from this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Blanca. And Amede, I give you the last word.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone for your insightful inputs. Think to conclude the main point, two key points that I will keep going forward. Blanca mentioned the role of conflict of interest that I think need to be emphasized in the process of stakeholders mapping the system, that you trying to identify the key element, what are people losing, what are the benefit, their values and interests. And of course, the main point is also for me now is how to try to find a systematic way to consider the values, to rank the values. So this is something we'll try to explore, and if anything came up, I'll be happy to share with the group going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amede, Blanca. Teresa had to leave, Tatiana and Haley for kickstarting this conversation, and thank you everybody for joining us. So we're a few minutes over our time, but I just want to remind you that now, please take these discussions to the Slack channel on Justification. Let's continue the conversation. There've been some resources shared. Ali shared quite a few papers there on the chat, and a few questions and answers that have remained unanswered on the chat. So I encourage you to ask them again on Slack, and then I encourage everybody else to try to respond. We will be opening up the next channel over the weekend and sharing with you video and some information and some guiding questions as before. So I hope you had a good time in this fishbowl. I hope it worked. I hope you found it as a good facilitation space, at least, an engaging space. And if you have any comments, please feel free to just let us know. We're testing these things and we want to learn with you about how to do it better. So without further ado, just say thank you very much, goodbye, and please join us on Slack for further conversation and discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a great week.
Bye. Thank you. We'll share the video soon.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.